Okay, I'm usually pretty awkward in the beginnings. Forget what I say.
Welcome to the Mr. Feels podcast, where we talk about everything and anything mental health related. I'm Tyler May, your host, and I'm your other host, Laura Benson, and we're here.
All right, there it is. We'll use that.
Before we get into the show, I just want to thank you all for listening, and to a lot of you for being so supportive, both online and offline. It really means a lot to Laura and I to see all of this support for something that we believe in and think that really matters, which is furthering a discussion for mental health and destigmatizing it and just helping others empathize better. I think you're really going to like this episode. It was one of my favorites that we've ever done, and it's actually the closest that I've ever gotten to crying on an episode because Jon, our guest, is just a good friend, and I met him when he was in not so great of a place. And, well, I'll just let you listen to the rest of the podcast to find out. But you can check him out on Twitter at Jon Paz, JONPAZ, and also jonpaz.com. So go do that, and thank you so much for listening.
What are you offering? Are you offering? Is it free?
Hello and welcome to the Mr. Feels podcast, where we talk about anything and everything mental health related. I'm your host, Tyler May.
And I'm your other host, Laura Benson.
And this week we are talking to my friend Jon Paz, who is a audio engineer / producer / etc. You get the idea. He does pretty much everything. How are you doing, Jon?
Hey, how's it going?
Jon and Laura and I are all kind of creatives who work in creative industries, both like full-time and part-time and lots of different aspects. Laura just recently got off tour, which how was your tour, by the way, Laura?
It was great. It was really challenging and wonderful and super rewarding, and I could definitely do it again tomorrow.
Oh, that's so good. And so I feel like we kind of like encompass a good little trinity of aspects as far as like Laura and I both being involved with Patreon, and Laura especially being a touring musician, and Jon being somebody who records touring musicians and is a musician himself. And I like to think that I can get involved into that sometimes, but am more on the photography side of things.
You're the photographer to support the touring musicians.
Yeah,
and therefore
exactly.
Their producers.
My goal is to like get on tour with a band, like switch foot and just take photos and just like pick up a guitar and then hope that they'll jam with me. That's my strategy. But yeah, so Jon, do you want to just kind of like tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of what you've gone through the past few years and kind of your journey with mental health?
Yeah. Wow. So
yeah, it's not a loaded question at all.
Not at all.
No
Okay.
worries.
Here we go. I think the first time that I would say I like experienced and understood that I had depression was probably in high school sometime, like many of us, I would say. But I think it really started like controlling the person that I am and was probably around like early college. And that was like such a time of self-discovery. I went to a state school for a little bit in the town that I grew up. And while I was there, I realized basically all of my friends from high school who were the overachievers had like left. And there were a few people that I still knew that were going to college with me, but I just kind of started isolating myself. And I think I probably have 2 or 3 friends from those years, like in at least in the town that I was like living in. So I really put myself like more out there online and started making internet friends and stuff. Started doing the YouTube thing, that whole sphere back in the day.
Yeah, that's kind of how Jon and I met, by the way.
Yeah.
We're both just lonely internet nerds who didn't talk to people in real life, so we figured that we would make videos here and then and talk to people online. But I think the first time I met you though was actually in person, but
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll get to that.
Oh yeah. So
were you so you were in college? Are you saying like, was this your entire college experience at the time?
No. So
Okay.
after a couple years there, I pretty quickly realized like, hey, I really want to do the music thing, really want to do producing and engineering, and the school there was just really not well fitted for it. So I found another school that I thought would be a better fit. Went over there. That school was in Oregon, Eugene, Oregon, and pretty quickly realized that that wasn't the best fit for me either. So I used that to springboard to a school in Nashville. And from the school in Nashville, I pretty much did their program, dropped out, and then just started working in the industry right away. So I basically wasted 3.5 years of college.
Yeah, me too, man. Me too.
Yeah. So as you can imagine, that's a time where I moved around a lot. And I would say that still has kind of like a latent effect on me, because having moved, I was actually like looking through like a map recently, and I was realizing like I have moved over 5 times in the last like 5 years. And it's kind of contributed to this sense of like nothing is permanent, everything is like ephemeral and perpetually changing.
I had a really similar experience in my early 20s also. I moved cities and houses. I did the math at one point and I've forgotten, but it was something like 7 or 8 times within 3 years. So I fully know what that feels like to be really ungrounded as a result of shifting so often.
Yeah.
So how did that manifest in your mental health? Haha.
Great.
Got him. I landed a question.
Well, so that was, I think that's still something I'm working through, honestly. Like, I have that conversation a lot with the people that I spend the most time with. It's like, yeah, this is fine for right now, but I feel like I'm just kind of hanging out until, the carpet gets ripped out from under me again, and I have to like scramble and recover from that. So I think it's led to a sense of distrust in a lot of things, just because a couple of those moves, gosh, not to get ahead of myself, but I left living in Nashville, which was like the move after Oregon. I left there.
How long were you there again?
I was there for just about 2 years. So I left there because my dad had gotten diagnosed with cancer. And so that was like an immediate, whoa, like I need to just drop everything and move. At least that's how I approached it. And I think that was the right decision at the time. And then following them around, so came to Albuquerque, where I'm living now. And we spent a few months and then went up to Denver with them. And I was in Denver for about a year. And then I moved back down here to Albuquerque. So 3 of those like most recent moves were totally precipitated by something outside of myself. And that's definitely led me to this sense of like, okay, when is something else going to come in and totally change everything? And just like waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Gotcha.
Fortunately, like I'm able to sort of push that back enough that it doesn't motivate everything I do, but it's definitely still this thing in the back of my mind, like on a subconscious level. All right, when's it going to change? When's it going to be different? Like, when am I going to have to adapt all over again? So I think it's taken more of a toll on me recently than it did before. But kind of rewinding back to the story, I started really experiencing that depression in early college when I was, there's a lot of isolation in my life and didn't really have a good community of people in proximity to me, I guess, like geographically. And I think I didn't know how to ask for help, even from the people I knew online. So I just felt like I was sinking for a long time. And I think the time that I spent in Oregon was great, but it was pretty brief. So it was a whole new set of friends that I needed to make out there. And then when I moved to Nashville, it was the same thing all over again. So it really stretched me socially. And I'm definitely a strong introvert. I think like the first time I took the Myers-Briggs, like there was 60 points toward like introvert that you could get, and I got like 55 out of 60. And I was like, yep, that sounds
strong.
about right. Yeah.
I did the same thing, and I would brag about it. I would just be like, I'm like 99% on the introversion scale, so leave me alone.
So
Use that as an
leave me
excuse to isolate
alone.
myself.
Yeah, I totally like. I used the Myers-Briggs as like a conversation starter for a few years. Like I would meet someone and be like, you got to take this test so I can understand you as a person. And
then you figure out that there's like no actual basis really to it.
like how it's like, definitely. I'm bummed about that. I think it's still like semi-accurate to from an anthropological like observation perspective, but Yeah, I don't know.
Not necessarily a code to live by and edit your behaviors through.
I mean, that's what I do, and it's served me really well so far.
and then he found the Enneagram.
Oh
all right. So just to bring us back a little bit.
yeah, sorry.
No. Oh my gosh, no. It's just that I hear your story and I recognize so much of a similar patterning in the way that I moved and experienced the world for a while. And as I really, it took me multiple years to sort out that feeling of knowing, like, anytime things started going well, I would feel that thing you mentioned of, okay, well, inevitably something's going to shift. I'm going to move. I'm going to lose a job. I'm going to, end a relationship. I'll be triggered into this place of chaos and everything will fall apart and I'll have to rebuild again. And that was a result of this just learning that I had implemented through my actions and behaviors. And then, external, I didn't have a sick parent, so I didn't have that level of external circumstance, but the way you felt about it resonates. And, I just wanted to bring it back to like the mental health component of it, where what I learned in years of cognitive behavioral therapy after that kind of cycle is that when you form these neurological pathways based on, behaviors that are reinforced, which is constantly moving, feeling isolated, forming new friend groups, each time you repeat that behavior, like that groove in your synaptical conversation gets deepened. And so it's harder to envision a different pattern, right?
Yeah,
and you have
totally.
to figure out how to work with that with your mind. So I don't really have a question off of this, but I guess I just wanted to make that point that those cycles can become really difficult to get out of.
Yeah.
Like, how do you feel about it? Have you had any tools that have helped you learn to work past that?
I think that's the thing I'm like chewing on in my life right now. Finding ways of reminding myself that there is permanence, even if those things do change. Like looking at the factors that are constant, like my relationship with my family, and my relationship with my significant other, like things like that do span moves, they do span mood swings, they span a lot of other changing factors. They span, like job losses and gains and all of that. And looking at those things, I mean, my beliefs spiritually too, that's a huge source of being grounded, like my belief in God. And looking at those things that don't change has really helped me when I start feeling like, okay, when is the other shoe going to drop? And it's like, you know what, even if another shoe does drop, I'm still going to be steady and I can find that steadiness. And that's been like something that I have to relearn. I mean, like you're saying, it's like the channels, the pathways in the brain, it's like a canyon. The more water that flows through it of experience, the more like the deeper it gets. And so having to try to practice that in different scenarios and different like in response to different things. So that's what I'm kind of working on. And I don't think I'm doing like amazing. Like I wouldn't rate it 10 out of 10, but I think I'm doing all right.
I think that's awesome. That's such
3.5 on Yelp or so.
3.5 on Yelp. I feel like that's a 7, right? That's
no,
like a 7.
I got that joke from
Yeah,
you. I just realized I've been using that joke for a solid 3.5 years.
How would you rate it on Yelp?
Do you want to? Oh, there was a sponsor at an event that we were at, Yelp, and John would just use that joke all the time. Do you want to? Oh man, you just blew my mind. I totally forgot. I thought I was so original with that joke, and I remember no, everything funny I've ever said is stolen from somebody else. What was I guess going back to kind of those times is something that I'm more interested in talking because it's somewhat where I'm involved because I'm a selfish narcissist. How was your time, especially in like Nashville? We've talked a little bit about it, and like even talking to friends about it, it's just like we kind of connected right off the get-go of like depression, YouTube comedians and musicians, but we didn't really know each other well enough to like reach out or help one another. Can you kind of explain like where you were at that time?
Dude, okay. So I think this has like my awareness of this has really come from having elevation away from being in Nashville. Like, I don't think I realized it at the time, but being a creative and being like, at least for me as a musician and producer and somebody that aspires to work in these really creative avenues, I guess. It's really easy to play this like comparison game of, oh wow, everybody is so much better at this than I am, or like, do I have anything even special to contribute to the world, especially in a place like Nashville that's so like industry centric.
Yeah, for sure.
And like realizing that the guy that lives in the apartment next to me is probably twice as good as I am at whatever I am best at. And that's a hard reality to face. And if you mix that with this idea of, I am Jon, I am a musician, I am a producer. And so when I'm not getting to use those abilities, like if I'm not getting to make music in a meaningful way, or if I'm not doing production or audio work, that really impacts like my sense of identity. A little bit less so now, but I still like find myself going into that loop of like, well, if I'm this thing and I'm not doing this thing, then technically I'm nothing. Like I'm dividing by zero. And there's this sense of like self-worth that's wrapped up into it, and the sense of like, how am I going to be stable if like the nature of what I love to do is not stable, and therefore like if my musicianship or producing isn't stable, then like my identity can't be stable, or like the quality of what I'm doing isn't that great, so then that makes me just kind of a crappy person. And there's like a lot of that wrapped up together in that that I was definitely feeling at the time, and not able to even realize was happening. So it was slowly grinding me into the ground. Over the course of those 2 years, I was on the receiving end of some hard business decisions, got cut from some things that I was really looking forward to, or would have been a really big break. There was a really big tour actually the spring, I think it was 2015. Yeah, spring of 2015 that I was offered. It was like a 47-date tour, and they pulled the rug out from under me on that like a week in advance. So I was not just scrambling for like career advancement, but also for like a job. And and that was a whole
production.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I have so many similar mid-film, because I worked in the film industry for a while in Los Angeles in production, and had one of my biggest episodes actually was initiated by a film I was working on being shut down.
Yeah.
And it was the day we were working on it, and the day I was going to work, I got a phone call from my producer that was like, well, we're frozen, don't come into work today. And it was so then, sorry, continue, but that happened.
No,
so what do you do in that moment of
it's like, oh well, my life just totally changed.
That's funny. I'm seeing more and more similarities because that was also like a huge contributor into my severe depressive episode of just like having my entire team where I worked and loved get laid off on like my last day of my internship, and I'm just like, oh, that's what the real world's like. And just having to like come from that. So how did you kind of deal with that, Jon?
I don't think I dealt with it as well then as I deal with it now, because the reality of the situation, especially in creative fields, is that is par for the course. That is probably more of a constant than having like the best gig. So, I mean, that sounds really pessimistic, but you have to be prepared for the big rejections and the big, like, hey, everything changed, like we were talking about earlier. So having faced a lot of those, Tyler, like you were saying, like it does trigger something in yourself of like feelings of inadequacy. Like, man, if I'd been better, they would have figured out a way to make this work around me. Or maybe if I had like been more social, or it like automatically attaches itself to, like, at least for me, it attaches itself to like my weakest area that I feel like I'm struggling with. So like for a lot of my life, I felt like that's been the social side. Like I'm not the most outgoing or extroverted person that can like win a room over. Like that's not me. I have friends like that, and it's really hard to compare myself to those people, because it's like, shoot, this guy can walk into a room and leave with 10 friends, and I can walk into a room and then leave alone with like a panic attack. Like,
who's really the winner
like,
here?
I'm pretty sure it's not me. So I and so like playing the comparison game is so damaging. And so that was kind of a lot of the factors that were going on when I was in Nashville. And a lot of my friends that I had kind of moved there with were at a point where they were starting to get picked up in their careers. So they were going out on the road, and
Yeah.
they were always busy. So my community of friends that had initially been pretty strong just really dropped off. And so I had no one around me. I had 4 roommates, and I only ever saw one of them like once a week on a weekend. And it was just, it was in
Wow.
passing. And we were he was like the roommate that I was civil with, like hey, keep the peace, like clean the kitchen, like that guy. Instead of like, hey, let's just talk for a while. So yeah, I really had nobody to talk to. And, I was working maybe 80 hours a week or so for months there and
Jeez.
just killing myself. So actually Tyler, that's when we met, was like in the middle of all of that. So there were all of these like
Yeah.
factors going on. And, so we met at the soda parlor, right?
Yeah, I could just see like the pain and tire in your eyes.
Yeah.
It's like, I want to help you, but let's just joke about meaningless stuff instead for the most
And
part.
yeah, and honestly, like I think the social energy that I was like tapping into at that point, to be able to even like entertain you guys and like talk to you, because I remember being like full charm type during that, was I think because something was like snapping, something was like breaking in there. And so realizing like, wow, I can be this like social, outgoing, funny person that's like really likable, but it's like, wait, hang on. The fuel for all of this is that I'm like really broken inside.
No, yeah, and we were joking about that surface level, just talking about how broken we are as individuals, and just like talking about social anxiety in a way of just complete like comedy, because that's the way we both cope with things.
Yeah, make jokes about it, or
Um,
find ways to
Yeah.
articulate it better so people can relate to it better. I don't know, but
yeah.
does that answer your question? I'm not sure. I think I lost. I got
No,
lost here.
I was waiting for the part where you said that like I was the best person you ever met.
Oh, yeah,
and
well, okay.
helped
So we
things,
haven't-
turn things
we haven't
around.
got to that
Meeting,
part of the story.
meeting Tyler May turned it around
yeah,
for you.
yeah. Get to the redemption part that
Oh,
I brought on.
yeah. So yeah. So, go ahead, Laura.
I have a question that I can ask you, or if you want to just keep rolling, you're welcome to keep
Oh,
rolling.
go for the question.
I was just going to ask, so you mentioned working for 80-hour weeks and really grinding and feeling really isolated, and also breaking inside and experiencing a lot of depression. And the way that I've always experienced depression is really low energy and motivation. And I'm curious,
Oh, okay.
how you kept showing up for work during that time, or if maybe you were having kind of a different manifestation of the breaking apartness.
Yeah.
You said you were kind of getting a little manic almost.
Yeah, definitely. I would say that depression kind of does slow me down. It makes me feel more numb. It makes me feel like this crappy feeling all the time. And sometimes that can be like kind of a slow burn thing, and sometimes that can be like a sine wave. It really kicks in and then it comes out and kicks back in. And I wouldn't say it's like a regular thing like a sine wave, but sometimes you definitely just really feel it. And for me, that paired with anxiety is somehow like motivating to me. So when I get tense, when I get anxious, I think, okay, I need to work my way out of this. And like this self-reliance instinct kicks in. The caveat to that is sometimes in the short term. So if I have something that really needs to happen in the next 6 hours and it's a really high pressure situation, I will totally shut down during that. But if it's a long-term thing, I see that as really motivating, and I'm in the face of that really high functioning. So sometimes I'll induce tension or stress or deadlines into my life so that way I work against that, because I do work well in that regard. So in answer to your question, I think it was just like, well, this is something I need to keep doing if I want to achieve wherever I want to go, whatever it is. And partly that, 85% of success is showing up, or whatever that idiom is, where they just say like, okay, just keep showing up. There were definitely days when I would get, 2 hours of sleep and then roll into the studio that next morning and literally just drink insane amounts of coffee just to like be able to function. And it was definitely taking a toll on me in terms of like my performance and stuff. I mean, geez, like I would miss details. I would just be slow on the draw to things. And I think people noticed that, but yeah, I'm actually, so one of the days that I was working on recordings for a band that I was, I grew up on. I was like hugely into for years, and they were, some like a band that had inspired me to take the musical journey, and all of that. Like the first morning that they started recording, I was literally like a half hour late because I just like couldn't get out of bed. And so the studio manager is like texting me. He's like, "Hey man, like, are you gonna be here or what?" And it's like, yeah, sorry, like I'm on my way right now. Got stuck in traffic, as you always do. And so like I was running behind, and I was just like pushing it so hard that morning. And I walk in, and like my childhood heroes are there, and I'm just like, what the hell, dude? Like, like you couldn't tell me like who was coming in today, like so I could take it more seriously or something. But I think the variety of like not knowing what's going to walk through the door also probably kept me motivated too. Like today might suck, but tomorrow could be like XYZ band that everybody's into.
Yeah. I kind of wanted to ask more about that, because that was a time where I was visiting Nashville a couple times in a month, and just like hearing kind of about those experiences from you without the negative aspect, because it's more of like, hey, I'm breaking down right now, but like I'm just gonna act like everything is okay.
Yeah, you have to protrude this like facade of success, and like things are going really well right now. I'm going crazy, but things are also going really well.
Yeah, there was so many. I had at least 2 or 3 moments when I was in just like that severe depression of like not eating, not getting out of bed for almost anything, but then like something happening where I'm just like going out and just like trying to act like I was getting help and doing better, and like doing that, and in essence sometimes that helped and sometimes that made things even worse. Kind of how did that kind of affect you during those times? Because when I saw you originally, it's just like, wow, that childhood band that you're talking about was literally my favorite band, and I was like, this guy is in Nashville chilling with the homies, working in a creative industry for this band that we both love and adore, that have like not like changed the music world, but like has changed our worlds. I thought that you were like cool for that, and like every 3 months I still kick myself because I missed a text from you saying like, hey, do you want to stop by the studio and like see that? No, I still think about that from time to time, like, oh but yeah, how did your like forcing yourself to get out there when you might have seemed successful to some people or try to put on that facade, like kind of how did that kind of affect things, and what did you do, and what were the results kind of that?
That's a really good question. I think by and large, most of the people that I know have to do that to a certain extent, like to pretend that everything is fine, to pretend that things are going well. They have to put a positive spin on it. And I think it's tied into this idea that like if we're not doing well, then like people won't believe in us, like we won't believe in ourselves, and there's this whole like negative cycle of like kind of trying to apply as much positivity as possible. They say like doing this, it takes a certain amount of delusion. Like I think it's like Mike Birbiglia is like anybody who does comedy has to be kind of deluded to tell yourself it's going really well when it's actually not going really well at all. And so like trying to maintain that balance, and that's what I think I was having a really hard time with, is like I can be kind of naturally like a cynical person, so to be like trying to be positive is really hard for me. Like I'm just gonna call it like I see it, and that actually, so when I was talking to people, peers in the industry and, like a networking opportunities, I would end up talking about like how jaded I was by different things, and like how beat down by XYZ I was. And like, that's not what you're supposed to do. Apparently. So apparently you're supposed to like, just like be chill with them or whatever.
Not in networking events for sure.
Yeah. So I was just like, yeah, this town sucks, guys. Like, why is anyone here? Everything is so fake. This is all a facade. Everybody's success is just for like, everybody's propping themselves up on like the last thing that they were vaguely affiliated to. Like, oh yeah, my friend knows so-and-so, so I'm pretty much a big deal. And like all of that, and like.
And what did you do after you made so many friends through those conversations?
After, with the hordes of friends that I made from those conversations, I think there were a few people who really like latched onto that. And we're like, yes, this is not great. And then it ends up in like kind of like this commiseration circle of like, oh, our lives are so bad. And the reality is, like, even though I was going through so much extreme like tension and honestly putting myself through that,
Yeah.
it's a complete and total privilege to be able to make anything resemblant of a living in the creative field. And
Mm-hmm.
and Laura,
Sure.
going back to what you were saying earlier, like what things do I look at and focus on to help me stay stable when I feel like that feeling of impending doom? It's like, what do I actually need to have to do this? Nothing. I'm going to keep doing it as long as I'm alive. Like, whether or not it's always like a means of gainful employment, that's a different issue, but I'm always going to keep doing this. So why don't I just keep doing this thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as long as I can like pay my rent next month, I have no reason to be anything but feel very, very blessed. There's my spiel. I don't know. That's where I am now. That's how, like, I don't sugarcoat it. Like, some months are really slow, and especially like winter months, I really kind of did the timing wrong this year. So it's been a pretty slow December, but still, like, making it by.
And that's the same with like all of these creative industries where it's like essentially a gig economy of like, hey, if I were getting as much work as I did in like the week of shoots that I scheduled when I was in San Francisco for a few days, then like I would be very well off. But that's 1 week out of the year where like you don't get all of the business that you're wanting to, and some of the business that you do get are difficult things to have to deal with and people that you have to deal with. So how did the I guess conclusion of that Nashville experience go, and when were you kind of brought back to be more with family after finding out that your dad had cancer?
Yeah, so basically when he was diagnosed, I was actually taking myself on a vacation to like visit my friends in Oregon. So I was there, and then I got the vague text of, "Hey, your dad isn't doing that well." And it's like, "What do you mean my dad is like my dad at that point in his life looked like Dwayne the Rock Johnson. Like, he was built. He was huge, super fit. He'd swim for like an hour every day. He'd bike everywhere. He was like nuts, dude. Super, super fit, just ripped. And so I was like, what do you mean he's not doing well? Like, this guy could like do anything he wanted to and be totally comfortable. And so I knew something was pretty wrong. And so then within a few hours, they'd realized like his blood, white blood counts were like way out of control, and that was causing a bunch of organ failure. And it's like, whoa, this is like really serious. So I just got on the next flight down to Albuquerque that I could possibly get on, and flew out and ended up here. And it was like, well, this is my new life now, like being with family. And so I was actually about to embark on a tour with another band that I grew up listening to and was super into, and was a huge get for me. I ended up backing out of that 3 days before that tour because I kind of knew that I needed to be with family, and going on like 26 days across the country while my dad is like suffering in a hospital was like some version of hell that I didn't want to be a part of. So dropped out of that, and then the next chance I got, just moved out of Nashville, like flew over, drove all my stuff back, and then I was gone and with family pretty much, for the next year after that. And what's really interesting is that it took me a while to stabilize from that change of life. Like, okay, what is the new normal? What does my day-to-day look like? Who can I rely on? Who can I trust? And all of that, but also being with them and being able to talk through things with my parents, like as an adult now, because I'd been gone for a few years, was really actually helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had such a support community. Like, so many people came around us when all that happened, that I think that it was actually a really, really positive thing, and really pulled me back from kind of the edge that I was on. Toward the end of my time in Nashville, honestly, I was contemplating suicide. I was actually planning it. I'd figured out like where I was going to do it, and like how it was going to happen, and how I would like lead people off the scent for like 3 days up until it. And then, so yeah, then, I had the whole thing planned, and I remember just like this feeling of, isolation and despair, and realizing like, if I did disappear for like a week or two, people probably wouldn't notice, just because I've been such a hermit this whole time anyway. And so suddenly getting pulled out of that situation, and to back up a second, like, I believe that a few friends, Tyler, you included, were like planted in my life right at that time, right at that crucial like window where if I had stayed isolated much longer, I think bad things would have happened. But I was still really having a hard time on my own. And so when I got pulled back to be with family, it was like, hey, I suddenly have a purpose, I have a role, and this is about more than just myself. And being able to be there for my dad, who was literally within like inches of his life, like helped me not focus entirely all the time on myself. And I think that was really, really important.
Yeah, it's crazy how you can convince yourself of like being able to just kind of disappear and nobody really notice or care.
Yeah.
Definitely had that experience, and it's kind of amazing to see the similarities in not only our stories but also with Laura's story as well, as just these aspects totally coming together. But then something out of nowhere that kind of seems like a horror story kind of ends up being a redemption story. Did you how did you kind of see that at the time? Was there a part of you that kind of saw it as saving you, even though it was a horrible situation, but saving you from like Nashville and that? Or was it just like, oh, this is even worse, you just had to like get in the thick of it again?
You know what's really interesting? It was kind of a duality. And I think a lot of things are multifaceted like that. But for like maybe from a month out before I ended up leaving Nashville, I was like, I was taking these long car rides to work and just like screaming in the car, just like, get me out of Nashville, God. Like, whenever you want me to leave, just like give me some sort of opportunity, give me some like just show me when. If not, like, I'm just gonna go crazy while I'm here. Just get me out whenever you want, like, and I'll take that cue. So I saw this thing with my dad as that cue, and so in that there was like this sense of like peace. Like, I don't understand what's going on, but clearly this is like lined up to work this way. And so there was peace in that. At the same time, it's like peace on one front, resolution, but at the same time, like, wow, there's a life and death thing going on with a family member that I'd always taken for granted. And so, there was this duality of like resolution from the career opportunity side, but also this sense of like created tension from the family side. I don't know.
Yeah. And what was kind of your dynamic and role, and how long were you kind of in Albuquerque before you guys had to move around to Denver and then back?
We were in Albuquerque 3 months, and basically my mom and I during that period were just spending a lot of time at the hospital, and then also trying to get all the business sides of things like in order, like his leave from work and all of that, like just like the paperwork. And my mom did all of that stuff. I tried to help, and I kind of screwed things up. So I just decided that I would try to help her in every other way, and to be there for my mom too, because it's stressful to be alone, and I didn't want to leave her alone during all of that. And so
did you have siblings through this?
Yeah, I have an older brother, but he's in the military, so he was able to get like a couple of weeks off at a couple different points, but he wasn't able to be around for like the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
But so we were in Albuquerque for 3 months, then we moved up to Denver, and then
So I think that the perspective that you have now, and that it seems like you had at the time, of recognizing that you were getting what you needed in certain ways within that situation, and being reminded of community and family when you were on the verge in this very self-isolating situation. It's so complex and so beautiful. And I am not, religious. I don't prescribe to any sort of monotheistic faith, and I'm comfortable saying that on the podcast. Sure. But I do think, and I've done, I've done much more of kind of like Zen studies and learning about how we can work with the thoughts in our minds and understand kind of the bigger story that we're playing into and participating in.
Mm-hmm.
As human beings who are like focused on survival and then get panicked and then, kind of understand the macro sense of what it is to be a human being. And that can have a spiritual component to it too, and can be connected to God if that's, where it comes from for you and is valuable. And I think that's so awesome. And I'm curious now if you have a different perspective on your overall mental health as a result of that experience, if you have a different perspective on the overall kind of way that you fit into the world. Yeah, where are you now? That's where I'm
That's
trying to get a question to.
That's an incredible question on so many levels, and I don't know if I am fully like actualized in understanding everything that's going on.
Right. Well, we never are. Right?
Well, I don't know. Who's to say? What if we all were all the time? Okay, no, just kidding.
That's true. Maybe we all are all the time.
Oh, jeez, that would be a reality that I don't want to be in. But honestly, and I think that's to some extent it should be. It's apparent to me, like even just in this conversation, how that has impacted me, because the way that I perceive it is different. It is like this sense of realization that there are things outside of myself. I believe that there is a God who is in control of these things, and to not have to worry about every minute detail and the timing of everything, and like how I need to think and what I need to think about in order to prepare for everything. Like this sense of anticipatory panic that I would feel in every moment. Like, am I doing this thing right? Like, I struggle with that so much anyway. Like, am I doing this the absolute best possible right way? And when it comes to something like losing a family member, that's ripe for overthinking. Oh my gosh, because it's this sense of immediacy too. Yeah. And like I said, I shut down with that sense of immediacy and panic, and having the realization that there is more to this world and there is more to life than just what is going on inside my brain has helped me, I think, process through things. And I think that's actually like a coping strategy that was like the depersonalization of saying like Jon is experiencing a sensation of this, like I am experiencing sadness, I am feeling sadness, not I am sad. Sadness does not define me. It is something that is happening. And that has been, I don't think I came across that the way that most people do, but I came across it in the sense of like, yeah, things can happen to me, but ultimately they are things that are happening to me. They are not me. And so I feel like I'm able to be more steady in the face of that, and realize that like I am ultimately not in control of the universe, and I don't have to worry about that. And that's like a huge stress off my shoulders. I think that like you were alluding to, having to use that pattern of like looking at things from the outside was something that I had to do regularly, especially during like my dad's illness and all this change and like everything that's going on. Everything happens so much, in the words of Horse eBooks. And having to reinforce that pattern was like one of the best things that's happened to my mental health, of really retaining this sense of like I'm an individual apart from like what happens to me.
Yeah, because the repercussions of the inverse is detrimental.
Yeah. And I didn't have that pattern before. Like it didn't exist, and now it's definitely reinforced. Sometimes I definitely like get lost still in like a really, really strong emotion or feeling, but a lot of times I'm able to separate myself from like, okay, is this a problem that is based on like who I am, or is this like a problem because I didn't get enough sleep, or a problem because like I'm pinched financially, or whatever it is? Like, what's the root of this? And is it's like never just like me, it's like something's happening.
I feel like having an experience in being that lost in your thoughts is such a I guess an eye closing experience that leads to just like an eye opening existence once you come out of it. Just like you were saying, of like not like saying, no, I'm sad or I'm feeling sadness, but like sadness is kind of happening to me and this is what's happening, rather than like accepting it as an identity. Which when I fell real hard, I thought I had already kind of given up on life in general, but then I took it one step further to be like, I'm not only worthless and a jerk and what have you, and like full of hate. Like I would have the recursive thought of just like, I am hatred, I am nothing, and then just think of nothingness for an extended hours. And that is when it got the scariest. So I think that having the opposite of that to combat it, whenever I start to have those like identity battles within of like, this sucks, why am I this way, I'm usually a way quicker to assess that like, hey, this is a circumstance that is outside of my control most of the time. There's no reason to make it into something that it's not. So just like what you were saying kind of reminded me of just the trope that I've kind of been learning and living by the past few months, is as far like your response is almost infinitely more formative than your circumstances.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the choice, like you have the choice in every moment, right? And
Exactly.
that's what gets so hard with mental health stuff, is if you're in the thick of the emotional intensity of a situation, it's really hard to pull back and be like, oh,
Yeah, the consciousness.
all of this is happening. I'm raging right now in this depressive state, and I can choose right now to react differently or to form this story differently.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's actually, I don't remember where I saw a video a long time ago about depression, and it was this woman who was a psychotherapist talking about that identity, how charged the assumption of identity related to mental health is, and how important it is to disidentify. Because, and she used the example actually of cancer, where she said, you know, a person who's been diagnosed with depression will say, I'm depressed. I am depressed. I am depression. Someone who's diagnosed with cancer will never say, I am cancer. They'll say, I'm suffering from, I have cancer.
Somebody who's depressed might say, I am cancer.
Right. And it's truthfully, you know, anxiety, depression, all of these things they're emotional and psychological, but they're started by physiological processes in the body. And so it is a part of our physical body in the same way that like a tumor forming under your lung is, you know, it's different clearly, but I don't know. That's a really helpful way of reframing that and realizing that it is a part of the physical process, not just your fault, you know?
Yeah. Well, and like something I've been learning through like the grief process and everything is that it's okay to feel negative emotion. In fact, it's actually a good thing, because balancing out, like if you're feeling negative emotion 100% of the time, something is probably wrong. But, you know, like with grief, there's, you know, it kind of swings. Like there are moments where it's kind of okay, and then there's times when it really like kicks back in, and the intensity is different, but it's, you need to be able to feel that to be able to work through it. And in the same way, I think you're right with like depression too. Like it's caused by physical chemicals and like a lot of different factors. And I'm not a mental health professional, so I can't go too deep into that. But being able to feel those things and then counter with something else, like this is something that I'm currently feeling. Like this is something that I am currently going through. Like in the same way that, yeah, like if I need to sneeze, you know, I need to sneeze, but then like I am not a sneezer. My sneezing doesn't define me. Maybe
Right.
if I'm like my one moment of fame is just
I don't
sneezing.
blame myself.
Yeah. Like they cut to a shot of me somewhere and I just sneeze onto the camera and that's like who I become. But like,
Yeah, you become
yeah,
sneezeless.
Sneeze.
I come up here, sneezies on.
Oh man. Yeah, but also realizing, like, and this is something I was either reading or listening to recently, is that just because you feel something also doesn't mean that it's true.
Yep.
Actually,
Yeah.
shout out to NPR Invisibilia,
Huge.
because their whole like last
Oh, they're
their
so
last season
good.
was like all about that. And yeah, and it's like wait, hang on. That means just because I think something also doesn't mean that that's true. And that's really,
Yes.
really helpful for countering this, like a lot of things, like the inner critic also, like as a creative, because it's really, really easy to get ruled by your inner critic of like, this isn't good enough, you're not up to quality, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Like, this is never going to be that great, you're never going to go anywhere. It's really easy to counter that with, hey, yeah, but you know what? That's actually not true. Like, there's who are you to say that, because you're not any better than I am, actually, you know? Like the part of my brain that's saying this is actually the same brain that's also creating things. So like, you don't know me, get away.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
But
You can sit over here for a while and not drive the ship.
yeah.
I had a topic that I wanted to hit on earlier, is just the fact of like the imposter
Oh yeah.
the fact of the imposter syndrome and how that kind of played, especially in your time in Nashville. But now I'm seeing the more interesting side of it is I feel like that imposter syndrome of like, I shouldn't be here type of thing, it is not the worst, but what kind of makes it the worst is the overcompensation to find your identity in something. So like, you're just combating that imposter syndrome with a really bad coping mechanism. I just kind of had that line of thinking. What do you kind of think about that?
Absolutely. So if your identity is rooted in like let's say, mine is in producing this album really well, and then I walk into a situation with big producer or big engineer or whatever it is, like also in the room, realize like, whoa, hang on, like I don't belong here in this room with this big famous person or artist or whatever it is. I don't belong here. It's like, wait, if I am a producer, like that informs this sense of like I need to perform here, like, or else I am nothing, like all these like critical thought processes, versus like I am a human being that also does music and also enjoys producing. Then yeah, I'm just going to be there and I'm going to have a good time and I'm going to have as much fun and feel natural about it, because again, it's not who I am. Like I don't have to prove to anyone that I'm doing this thing. That said, it's kind of in the same way that like our physical posture and health can influence our mental health. It can kind of be like a cart before the horse before the cart thing, where like I've been in a lot of situations where I get strong imposter syndrome, and it's like, okay, the only way to get through this is to just do it again, just keep doing it and desensitize yourself, and don't let it have that power. So even if you're in a moment where you suddenly feel like an imposter and you don't have time to work through this, like, oh, well, what are my intentions here? What is my identity tied to? Like, who am I telling myself that I am? Like all this stuff. And you don't have time to deal with that, like in a long form, like self-thought process. Like you can still think, okay, well, I'm just going to do this thing. And even if it's awkward and weird and terrible, it's going to be over with, and just take little steps and keep going, because that's the way you got to get through it. Sometimes you just feel like you're not supposed to be, but it's also like, if you were in a room with somebody that is like a good friend of yours that you were like trying to impress, you would know all this cool stuff. You know all the cool tricks and like cool things that you'd want to do to like make the mix sound cooler or make the song sound cooler, and just go with that, dude. Like I think it's this elevation of other people too. Like, this person has the power of life and death. Like they hold my entire career opportunities in their hand. And so you get motivated by this idea of like, I have to do super well. And I don't think there's any easy way around that. Like there really isn't.
Yeah, definitely not.
And I can guarantee that I will again probably soon feel strong imposter syndrome, so we can revisit then. But sometimes what I also do, like I'll literally just try to tank it, and just say I don't like, just say like I don't care about this. Like, so what if I do a bad job? Like, what's so wrong with doing a bad job? Why don't I just try to do something wrong?
Isn't it hilarious like how much better you can do when you just stop caring about it and you get a little outside of your head?
What if I set up this like mic stand wrong? Okay, cool. And then someone's like, hey, you did this wrong. Oh, sorry, that's crazy. And then like you can laugh it off. The stress goes away. Okay, cool. We're working together now. So that helps. I mean, there are definitely some people that just have this energy that is so like, they have just intense pressure. I used to work for this band when I was working on the road, that like the front man had just like this intensity, and like anytime someone got around him, they would just like feel nervous. And it's just like the way he carries himself, the way he talks to you. It's just like a lot of factors. And sometimes around those people, it's just hard to like feel not like an imposter, but you just got to keep doing it and eventually say, this person doesn't have power over me. Like this person is not the final arbiter of like life and death and like success and not success. Like I will still be scrappy if something goes wrong here. Like I'll still figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't give away your power to other people.
Yeah. It's like having like your power drawn out of you and like given to this other person like in mass, like, here, take all of my powers of self-agency.
Yeah, and then I think the opposite actually has some problem too, to think that like, I guess we hear the terms of you have the power to do like absolutely anything a lot, and a lot of people like get behind that, but like, think about it, like, no, you don't. There's so many external factors that just are completely out of your control. So thinking that like you have complete control over everything is almost as bad as thinking that these other people have control over everything. And that's when you kind of get in the problem of like overthinking things too much in both scenarios, and you start to think internalizing these things. So I think probably the best course of action that I've found is not overthinking things too much. The solution is not thinking less about the thing. I'd phrase it more as like the solution is thinking less internally and thinking more externally. Not like, oh, is this person gonna do this type of externally, but like more of like, hey, what can I do to like better this situation? What can I do to help better this person? And like putting all of your energy and efforts not outside of like solving yourself and your problems, because sometimes the problems you have are there for a reason. You just can't solve them. But putting all of your efforts and energy into accepting kind of what you have to work with, and then not over stressing about it, but trying to make the best of it through helping the situation itself and helping others, rather than just only focusing all your efforts on helping yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I'll get off my high horse.
No.
I got excited a little
That's
bit.
good.
Might be time for final question.
No, yeah, I was definitely thinking of that. Oh no, it's like time to kind of wrap up. I feel like we could do 3 episodes with Jon right now.
Triple episode. Let's go.
One quick question before we get there. Who knows? We might have you on later. But one question I kind of wanted to get before is like tracking back to the suicidal thinking, and both of us have experience with that, and even a previous guest, Stellar, Laura's friend, did as well. And we kind of talked about how it's just like having those experiences and having to have been brought that low has been immensely helpful into thinking like I needed to go that low in order to like feel as good as I do now. And so essentially both of us kind of echoed the thought that like we're essentially living on borrowed time. Anything that happens like from here on out is just like extra. I just kind of wanted to, do you have any thoughts on
honestly, like the borrowed time thing, I get more from like everything that happened with my dad. It's like, well, if anybody could like just go at any moment for like any reason without notice, like, then I really want to make the time that I have, make the most of it, and make it stretch and like make it meaningful and be present in that. So yeah, that, but also I think it ties back to this earlier idea of like feeling negative emotion is a good thing. And that's really counterintuitive, especially like for me, like at least the way I was raised and whatever subculture I was a part of was like so intent on, like whatever you feel is like the ultimate barometer of something's like moral goodness or ethical goodness. So like if you don't feel good about something, it's automatically like bad. And if you do feel good about something, it's automatically good. When we can see that like the things that like we can make a lot of choices that feel really good in the moment, but are actually really bad. I mean, look at like food for an example, but like that's a separate podcast entirely. But like, yeah. And so like realizing that like feeling bad things, eating the vegetables is actually sometimes a good thing. Sometimes if it's like a large general trend, then it's an indicator of like something else going on, but it's not fundamentally bad. So when I think about the idea of, the past where, having suicidal thoughts and all of that, that kind of gets included in that. I think there are a lot of people who say that thinking that way is like the most selfish thing that a person can do. And I struggle with that notion because it is like you do have a certain level of like self-absorption to think in that pattern, but at the same time, like, yourself better than most other people know you. So I don't think it's someone's place to come in and say like, you're being so selfish for you're thinking about ending things. Like that's entirely the wrong approach. And I don't think we need to parse motives on like a massive scale either. That just doesn't make sense to me. What does make sense is that, with the sense of gravity from going through something like that, it also does enable you to feel joy and peace and stability when you're not in the middle of that, and realize that is a gift, and that's something that's actually really special, and it's not just a normal like noise floor of emotion. It's a good thing, and to not take that for granted. So yeah, I think that's my thought on that.
Yeah, just reverberates thankfulness and appreciation a whole lot
Yeah.
more. Which I guess transitions into our last question of just like, we like to ask people, what is your favorite or what's your best and worst thing about having your experiences with mental health problems and mental illness? What's the best thing to come out of it, and what's like kind of the worst thing to come
You know,
out
honestly, I think again, it's a duality. Like, the worst thing is that it makes me look at myself and over scrutinize everything that I'm doing. It gives me this like deer in the headlights, skidding my heels, like, oh my gosh, I need to do this better. I need self-criticism in the moment where I really can't even change anything, but I just need to keep going. At the same time, it has given me this like awareness to turn inwardly and look at myself and like look at what's going on, look at the general trend, and be aware of what's going on. I think that's been really, really helpful for me processing and dealing with a lot of different, extreme emotions and extreme like general trends that have happened in my life, is like being able to look at it and look at myself and see what's going on. I think part of it's as an artist too, like we're so zoomed into the minute emotion of everything anyway. Like that's our bread and butter, is like picking apart these different micro emotions, an actor's face on screen and just a slight emotion. And that plays so much stronger than this macro, like whole face shift into a smile kind of thing. Like we're so dialed into that. So when the big things happen, a big shift, it's easy for me to get like really freaked out. And, it's like looking at like a printed paper map through a telescope. It just moves a little bit, but you're like, whoa, what the heck just happened? And and to realize like, okay, I can zoom back out and I can look at the whole situation, like look at the whole map again. Nothing has changed. It's just moving around a little bit. And it's these little jitters that like get me really freaked out sometimes. So it's important for me to realize that there is a big picture, because if I'm just zoomed in on the little things, I will totally get lost in that.
Yeah. Wow. So that's you just hit the both aspects, and I didn't realize it. I was like, oh no, he hit everything. Oh, what do we do now? Are we done? Oh man, I gotta go think for 3 hours.
Was I not supposed to do that? Hang on.
No, you were. It caught me off guard how put together that answer was, and now I'm lost.
I was just gonna say that was a perfect illustration of the fact that the best and worst don't exist in a dichotomy, and they are complexly in relationship to one another.
That's so
no,
true.
It's a balance.
Our whole podcast our whole podcast is flawed. The questions we've asking has been wrong the whole time.
No.
John, would you like to take over my spot as host of this podcast?
Welcome to Mr. Feels, the podcast. A podcast where we talk about anything and everything related to mental health and how brilliant.
All right. Bye, John. Shut your mouth. It's great having somebody with thought before you derailed everything.
And I will be here to usurp your role as host.
Thanks so much for being on. Does anybody have any last closing thoughts? Are we good?
Thank you so much for coming on, John.
I just want to thank you guys for having me on. This has been actually a lot of fun.
Yeah. Isn't it weird how talking about these things is
and
fun?
I think it's healthy and it's good, and it's like good to represent different people's experiences. So I think that's a really cool thing that you guys are doing.
Thanks. We do too. And we'd love to have more people on. So if anybody has any guest recommendations, feel free to shoot us a DM on Twitter at Mr. Feels Podcast, or email us at mrfeelspodcast@gmail.com. We're also on patreon.com/Mr. Feels. You're just getting hit with a whole bunch of Mr. Feels links right now. Please check it out. We're struggling. This has been such a joy for Lauren and I both to do. It's kind of been like both a mental haven and a creative haven that we've both gotten to do, and I'm glad to have you a part of it, John.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so we'll have our musicians, Driftless Pony Club, take us out, but if you will, check out patreon.com/Mr. Feels and Mr. Feels Podcast on Twitter. That would help us out a bunch. Text your friends, tell your mom. My mom likes it, so maybe yours will too. Thanks again. We will see you guys next time.